I began babysitting at 13 to earn extra money to spend on horribly embarrassing things, like Fall Out Boy CDs. My dad was a lawyer and I would almost always work for his clients and get referred by word of mouth. I was babysitting for this one family who had a little girl who was 9 and a little boy who was 7. The parents seemed okay, if a tad crotchety, giving me a full schedule to follow, and jokingly threatening to beat up any boy who might mysteriously show up after they left. It felt cruel for them to even accuse me of knowing a boy, given I basically looked like an overgrown baby with frizzy hair at that age. Almost immediately after the parents leave, the little girl sings in a creepy, high-pitched voice. We're all alone now. Cue the Shining soundtrack.
I know!
The little boy chimed in.
Let's play rape!
Looking back now, I know the kid probably just heard the term on TV, knew the word was shocking, and said it for a reaction. I totally bought into it at that time, sputtering, wide-eyed, and changing the subject quickly. These kids were hell for the next hour. I wouldn't let them watch South Park on TV because their parents did not seem like the type to allow their precious 7 and 9-year-old to watch a show like that. As soon as I said no, the little girl said casually, "Oh, that's fine. We'll just go play the PlayStation in the family room. Feel free to watch it out here." I knew exactly where that was headed, and said they could watch any other TV show in the living room while I made them dinner. The parents had left instructions to make them sandwiches. I could handle that. Before I had even gotten out the bread, I heard a massive crash. The little girl had broken a glass. I was pissed, but ultimately there was no way to punish her, so I cleaned it up while these 2 incredibly weird kids watched me with wide eyes. Dumping the broken glass in the trash, I went back to making the sandwiches. I'm a vegetarian, so while the kids had chicken, I made a simple salad one for myself. Just as I was finishing up, the little boy screamed out in what, even from my hypervigilant state as an accountable teenage babysitter, sounded like a pantomime of pain. Nonetheless, I ran over to the couch in the living room to check on him. "My ankle!" he howled, dramatically flopping onto the couch. While I tried to figure out how he had hurt his ankle, the little girl slipped out of the room. I was aware of this, but didn't really pay it any mind. Focused on this little boy pretending to be in pain. He kept saying,
"I went to stand, but it hurt too much, I don't know."
Over and over again until his eyes suddenly flicked to just behind me, where I could see the little girl standing with a perturbing smile on her face. He was miraculously healed all of a sudden. Praise the Lord. At this point, I was just thinking that these kids were really weird, craved attention a little too much, and probably needed more parental involvement. Whatever, I was 13, and that $60 was only 4 hours away. I set out the sandwiches for the 2 to eat at the dinner table, went to get us some soda, and returned. After pouring the soda for both of them, I realized they hadn't even taken a bite out of their sandwiches yet. I asked them what they were waiting for. They smiled.
"For you to take a bite of yours."
I am so glad I had the gut feeling to open the top part of the bread to my sandwich, because when I did, I saw glass. Broken glass that I had put into the trash. I stared in horror at these little kids staring at me with these menacing twin grins. I lost it, shouting, "Are you serious? At the very least, you could have really injured my mouth. What's wrong with you two?" Instead of crying, or apologizing, or pretending to be ashamed or confused, these 2 little fuckers began laughing. Not like kids. It was too low. It wasn't that silly, free laugh kids laugh. It was low and threatening. I'll never forget that noise. My immediate reaction was, these kids are too young to be laughing like that. I called my elder sister, who was 17 at the time, and cried about what had happened. She came and took over for me. We left the house with chills after the parents arrived. I never babysat for those 2 again. What I can't get past is the level of premeditation that went into sprinkling that broken glass in my sandwich, and the totally remorseless way they responded to my getting upset. They were unlike any 2 kids I've ever met before.
This was a huge thing to my friends and family. and I didn't really talk about it back then as it scared the fuck out of me. But it was a while ago, and is a really well-known, creepy story among myself, my friends, and family. I was living with my parents and sister in Brisbane, Australia at the time, 2008, which means I was 19. I remember my dad had just got Foxtel, which is cable TV in Australia. Only the TV in the lounge room could use the cable box, and I really wanted to somehow get the cable in my room without paying $99 or whatever for a new box. So one day, my dad went out and bought an AV transmitter receiver. It was basically a two-piece bit of hardware where you would plug this tiny box into the cable TV in the lounge room, and it would transmit a video signal to the receiver, connected to the TV in my room. So one Saturday, I decided to connect it. My younger sister, who was 16 at the time, was the only other person home. She was upstairs in her room. My room was downstairs. I opened the box and connected it up. At first, I was going back and forth, trying to get the cables right, trying to get the channel right, but no luck. Until I finally got something. I remember just sitting there, and something started fuzzing in. I remember thinking, oh, here we go, and waiting to see the picture come in clearly. This is where things started to feel like a horror movie. As it started fuzzing in, I remembered that this whole time the cable box wasn't even on. And that's why it hadn't been working the whole time. But then, why was I getting a signal? It seemed to all hit me at once. As I realized the box was off, the picture fuzzed in, and I saw a bed. This is an actual photo of the feed we were getting. I freaked the fuck out. At first, I thought it was my bed. I had recently seen Saw 2 and remembered that scene where she turns on the TV and it's a camera filming her in her apartment. That was the first thing I thought of. I sprinted upstairs to my sister, absolutely terrified. I told her to come down and take a look. She came down and we both realized it wasn't my bed. We didn't know whose bed it was, or how I was getting the signal. Obviously, it was the AV receiver picking up a camera signal, but we were just so confused as to who or what it was for. Eventually, my parents came home, and we concluded that it would have to be a neighbor or someone living very close by for us to be receiving the signal. We waited until about 6 p.m., and then someone came into the room. My dad recognized them as one of our neighbors. We still didn't know what the camera was for, but we assumed it had something to do with fidelity. Either his wife or he had set it up to watch the other and see if they were cheating. Either that, or it was to tape themselves having sex. We entertained the idea that he was a murderer and would film himself murdering people in his room. We'd make jokes about how one night we'll turn it on and it'll just be his face with clown makeup on, staring at the camera, waving. And then him walking out of the bedroom with a knife. This never happened, but what did happen was still super creepy. We connected to this signal for over a week, but after a few days, the novelty kind of wore off. We felt a bit weird watching it, and just resigned to the explanation that it was to catch his wife cheating. Until one day, we turned it on and realized what we had discovered. Our neighbors were having a bunch of renovations done to their house. During weekdays, they would be out, and there would be workers at the place pretty much all day. It had been like this for over a month. I called out to my mom, the only person home at the time. We started watching the feed and saw a man walk into their room. It was the plumber that had been there regularly for the renovations. We didn't think anything of it, until he started opening drawers. He started getting the wife's underpants and sniffing them, and doing all that creepy shit. At first, we were like, oh my god, how embarrassing, he's being filmed. Will the neighbors see this somehow? But then, what happened next was truly terrifying. He slowly walked over to the camera and looked right down the fucking lens. We were convinced that he knew we were watching. Mom immediately called Dad. I kept watching. He started fiddling with it and then put it back down. I told Mom that I don't think he knew we were watching, but he's definitely the guy that put the camera there. Dad came home, and by this time the plumber had left. Against Mom's pleading, Dad went over to the neighbors to tell them what we had seen. Mom wanted to completely stay out of it and was terrified. Understandably. When we told the neighbors, they had no idea what we were talking about. They allowed Dad to go up to their room, and what he found, the thing that was holding the camera, was an installed device in the wall that was designed to monitor water usage. This was completely normal at the time, as Brisbane had been hit with a drought recently and there were lots of water restrictions. The plumber had installed this into the wall, but had fitted a camera behind it in the wall to watch the bed. Immediately, they called the police, who came over and conducted an investigation. For the next week or so, we didn't hear much about it. I spent most of this time just telling my friends, showing them pictures, but truthfully, my whole family was scared every night. It was just very creepy, thinking that we could have stuff like that hidden in our house. Chances are we didn't, but it was still really scary. After a couple of weeks, my mom was speaking to the wife next door and asked what happened with it all. The wife said that the police found out he would, at nights, come to our street and sit in his car, which had really tinted windows, and watch them on his laptop. When Mom told me this, I got the biggest shivers. The reason was because on multiple nights, when I had driven home late from my girlfriend's or walked home drunk after a night out, I remember seeing a station wagon, always about 30 meters down the street from our house. It was never there during the day. I'd always walk past it and look at my reflection in the windows, assuming no one was inside. I was always so confused by whose car it was, but literally never thought it was anything. It still scares me so much that it was just this creepy fucking plumber sitting back there on a laptop watching a hidden camera stream of my neighbors. Anyway, that's my story. It's all true and still creeps me out to this day.
These stories still stick with me. I grew up in a house on Long Island in the town of Brentwood. It was a quiet town for its location. My dad worked as a taxi driver at the time, which meant he would usually end up coming home early in the morning, and I would greet him. It was Saturday. I was watching cartoons, and my dad comes in, and I run to say hello. My mom must have heard us from the bedroom and says, "Hello, honey, don't go in the pool. It's not ready yet." My dad and I think, that's weird. It's 6 a.m. We weren't going into the pool. We just brush it off. And he goes on to tell me his usual stories of the crazies he's picked up throughout the night. That's when we realized it was Saturday, and my mom was at work, and it was only he and I in the house. The voice sounded just like my mother. We had just moved into the house. Fast forward a couple weeks, and my new neighbors came over to welcome us to town. It was the two mothers, two sons, one who was my age and one that was a little older in the 10th grade, and two little girls, one blonde-haired girl and a shy brunette that didn't talk. We got to playing some soccer, but the little brunette girl is nowhere to be found. The curious little kid I was, I ran around the property trying to find her. And I find her in the woods, a dangerous area to be exploring. She asks me to play tag, but I decline, wanting to get everyone in on the game. The reactions of everyone, as I asked for them to join us, was puzzling. Along with a response from one of the mothers, "We only have one daughter." It turns out a small, brown-haired girl had drowned in our pool 10 years ago, and her mother had soon passed away from a heart attack. The next 5 or 6 years were terrifying for everyone. I have a huge amount of stories from that house.
So my grandparents, for some reason, had a way of always moving into haunted houses. The houses weren't really creepy, but they would always have weird, paranormal stuff happen. Here's my experience. It was summer vacation. and I was around 13 or 14 years old. At this age, I always would stay up late, eating junk food and playing video games. Because of this, I could hear the vibration of anybody walking down the hallway. I was at the end of the hallway across from my grandparents, so if I heard someone walking, it would usually be my grandpa, getting some Tums. It was a recognizable pattern, the sound of feet hitting carpet as it makes its way down the hall to the Tums, and then back to the bedroom. It would be finished off with hearing my grandpa close his bedroom door. Then I started to notice something. Randomly, throughout the night, I would hear these footsteps. If it was any later than 1 a.m., I would open the door, and nobody would be in the hallway. Staying rational, I assumed my grandpa just got inside his bedroom before I saw him. So when hearing the footsteps, I would wait till they were at the other end of the hallway, where the cupboard with the Tums was, and then open the door. Nothing. Dark as the night could be. I got used to the sounds, since they weren't super loud or anything. It's just footsteps on a carpet. I thought I was just hearing things half the time. One night, I was lying in bed, just watching TV. The head of my bed shared the same wall as my bedroom door. I heard the footsteps make their way down the hall, then they come towards my end. I'm used to this, and I usually just ignore it now. It could be my grandpa, it could be the ghost, but then the footsteps stop, and my doorknob makes a crazy clacking sound as if someone is rapidly turning the doorknob without actually opening it. I jump out of bed, run to my door, and try to catch whatever it is. My grandpa can be a dick and is probably messing with me. Nothing. Dark as night. Quiet as can be. I open my grandparents' door slowly, and I'm greeted with snoring. I was born and raised in North Dakota. Back when I was in high school, a group of us would research murders that occurred out in the country. We would then go out to find the scenes and film the exploration at night. This was about 2 years before Blair Witch. It was something to do while we got wasted on shitty beer and teenage bullshit. Eventually, we ran out of places to go. After all, North Dakota equals few people, which equals few murders. But we got really good at finding abandoned rural farmsteads by driving dirt roads and looking for the signs. Deliberate tree groves and old mailbox posts were common markers. We were out looking when we spotted a tree grove that was out of place, a sure sign. We drove through the field and discovered an old, but not too old house. It had padlocks on the outside doors that were knocked off pretty easily. We dispatched of them and entered the kitchen. There were 6 of us, all with flashlights, and we lit up the kitchen dining area fairly easily. The table was the initial thing you noticed, and it was strange because of how normal it looked. It was set for a meal, and not a bowl was out of place. Only thing was, we'd been in dozens of these houses, and place settings were a first, especially unbroken ones. As we investigated the area, we found the fridge had the disgusting remnants of a full stock, and the cupboards were full of canned and dry foods. This was also a first. One guy found mail on the counter from early June 1978, and another found a creepy-ass TV guide in the living room with UFOs on the cover. All the family photos were hanging up. Mom, Dad, Bro, and Sis in their 1970s glory. The furniture was dusty, but in good condition. Everything was totally normal, which was super abnormal. As we dug around the house, we all started to realize that this house had not been moved out of, it had been straight up abandoned. Imagine locking the door to your house and never coming back. That's the state this house was in. Complete, unplanned departure. We went upstairs and split into 3 pairs to check out the 3 rooms. Ours was the closest, and it was obviously the younger boy's room. I can't describe what it looked like too well, because almost right away from the hall, we heard the most fucking terrifying scream I've ever had the misfortune of hearing. We went running into the hallway, and were all yelling questions at each other at the same time. After a few really long seconds, the two screamers caught their breath and said, "You have to go in and see." Walking down the hall and through the doorway, I prayed I wouldn't act like a pussy in front of my friends. I shouldn't have been concerned, because the others were as scared as I was. The room itself opened up to the left of the doorframe, and centered on the right side of the room was a queen bed, propped up on the pillows, with the blanket drawn to the waist, arms on top of the blanket, head turned slightly so it was looking you straight in the eyes when you entered the room, was a life-sized porcelain doll. Snow white skin, jet black hair, cold, dead eyes. Dead eyes lit up with our flashlights, like she was waiting for us. If the head hadn't been turned, I could excuse it, but it was turned. Ready for when we walked in. Ready for 20 years. Hasty exits were made down the stairs and into the car. It was during the ride that we started to get even more creeped out when we realized that even though the house had been abandoned, someone had taken the time to set up that goddamn doll, not packing food, clothes, or family photos. Setting up the doll was one of the last things done in this house. We researched their names, but got nothing. No tragic car accident, no grisly massacre, no extended family. Just a tacky time capsule in the middle of nowhere. We found out that the county had taken possession of the land for non-payment of taxes, explaining the locks, but never tracked down any more information on what happened to them, or why they left that fucking doll.